Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm on today with the wonderful Hemant Mehta,
Hi.
and we're going to talk about him and also probably other things, but mostly him.
I'm
So,
in. Let's do it.
so tell us a little bit about yourself for anyone who might not know about you.
Sure. My name is Hemant Mehta. I mostly do blogging at friendlyatheist.com. I've been doing that for like more than 10 years now. I also do videos on the Atheist Voice channel on YouTube. There's a Friendly Atheist podcast. But basically, I like writing about religion, politics, current events, things like that. So that's pretty much the main stuff I do online.
There will be a link to his blog in the description below, so you can go check out his work. Because he writes some really great articles, funny stuff, and also serious stuff. So there's a wide range of articles to look at.
Yeah, hopefully there's a lot. I mean, we're posting every day, so there's always something new happening now more than ever.
Yeah, I remember back when the art park was getting off the ground. He posted a lot of stuff on how they were managing their finances, so to speak.
Yeah, yep, that was an interesting one to follow, just because they were. It's not that they're doing anything illegal; it's that they're being totally shady with what they're saying publicly versus what they weren't. So it was just interesting to document, like, they're taking money from staffers. They said they were going to hire everybody in the community or open jobs to everyone in the community. Only later did they say, nope, you have to be a young earth creationist to get a job, things like that. So just pointing that out seems worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, they do some shady stuff on top of trying to spread these religious pseudoscientific ideas
Right, right.
around.
Even if everything they did was above board, like there would still be a lot of criticism because they're preaching all this nonsense. But when you couple that with they're charging so much money and offering so little, and they're doing it by getting government, funding for it. They're getting a tax break that I don't think they should be eligible for, but the court said we're okay. They pushed back when the local town they were in instituted a safety fee on like 50 cents a ticket. And they fought that one because they didn't really want to give back to the community, even though the community required that money. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see how they're making money off of this thing, how they're getting the money to build this thing, etc.
Yeah, and we'll certainly come back to it in a little while. But I want to ask you first. So you are the friendly atheist. So how did you become an atheist?
How did I become an atheist? Mostly, I think a lot of it happened when I was like 14 years old, around that time where my family had just moved to a new city, and and it sucked. And I remember starting to ask myself, why would God let this happen? Because it's like the worst thing that has ever happened ever. Uh, and what I realized is, oh, I'm allowed to ask that question. No one's ever told me it was okay to ask questions about the religion I grew up with, which wasn't Christianity, but it was like a religion. I prayed, I believed in God, etc. And so I started asking those questions. I started looking up the answers online, and everything I read about atheism seemed to make the most sense. It's not that I was wrong about my religion and another religion had the answers. It's that religion was wrong and atheism made more sense. And like, I think it took a matter of weeks where I'm just like, I don't think I believe in God anymore. And then after that, in the years to follow, the more I read about it, the more I learned about atheism, the more sense it just kept making. And in college, I basically got started with uh, quote unquote organized atheism. I formed a group. I got on the board of a national atheist organization. I started meeting people who run like national atheist groups. And so I kind of got involved in all that. And it wasn't long after that that I began blogging.
Okay, that's that's pretty cool, and your blog has certainly become very popular now. even the creationists are taking notice, as Answer in Genesis does, occasionally in their talks.
Yeah.
Which are really fun to watch.
They like it whenever people are talking about them, period, because they'd rather that happen than we not mention them. But it's always funny to watch how they respond to anything I write or someone else writes, because when you point out that they're not scientific, they get very, very mad.
Yeah, they actually blame you as well as others for the lack of attendance at the art park now.
I try. I do what I do.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very hard for me to decide whether, if I had the chance, would I go.
Yeah.
I think maybe. I don't know.
So I've been to the Creation Museum twice, and I paid for the ticket both times, and it was, I mean, there were reasons I was going. I didn't just go on my own, but I found it an interesting experience to see it firsthand for myself instead of just relying on what atheist friends were telling me about it, because you realize how they manipulate people. You get to see what the rest of the crowd looks like and that what they're intrigued by. And I mean, it's a form of brainwashing, but it's a powerful one because it really does look like they put money into this thing. It really does look kind of like a museum. And I think a lot of kids would walk through it and not know the difference, which is what creationists are banking on. I haven't been to Ark Encounter yet. I've been outside of it. I haven't gone inside yet, but I assume from what I've heard, it's very similar. That it looks really neat. It has these exhibits, but you have to start asking questions about what is inside of there, and so that might get a little weird. But it was a good educational experience. I would recommend people, spend the money and buy a ticket, just because when you could say, I've been in that place and here's what's wrong with it, it means a little more than random person who's never seen it, except from a laptop, except for reading articles about it. It means a little more when you could say, look, I've been there. I know what they do there. Just like if you're trying to speak about atheism, it's almost more compelling if you could say, no, I was a Christian. I attended church every week. I got confirmed in the Catholic Church, whatever. It just holds a little more weight.
Right. Yeah, I have family members who have gone to the Creation Museum and actually saw a kid here at LSU with an art park shirt, and I just thought, what a world we're living in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you start making YouTube videos?
That was a few years ago, and basically what happened is I had no plans to actually do YouTube, but this professor who lived in Chicago, not far from where I'm at, he contacted me saying he wanted to do a documentary about young atheists. He found the topic really fascinating, and he wanted to talk to me about maybe ideas or what would be interesting to cover. We had a conversation about that. And so he said, well, just to get some basic footage, just so I can have something to work off of, can we do an interview? He would toss me some softball questions that a lot of atheists get. I could try to answer them. And then I was like, yeah, I mean, that didn't seem like a big deal. And I figured I'd never see him again. You know what I mean? And so we did that. We taped him asking me things like, where do you get your morality from? Should you come out to your parents? How should you do that? And I didn't really know what he was going to do with those clips. I just figured, maybe he'll hold on to them until he has more stuff. He ended up putting them up on YouTube on this channel that he called The Atheist Voice, because he was going to have a bunch of atheist voices. And it was just the question and those clips. That's all these. So we put up like 5 videos that first day because there was a bunch of things we talked about. And the weird thing is, people found those videos without really us doing any promotion or anything. I think a lot of young people use YouTube the way I use Google. They have a question about, should I come out to my parents as an atheist? They would look it up on YouTube instead. And they found the video through that because that's what we basically titled these videos. And so it was fascinating to see that these videos were getting traction, even though we hadn't really done much. And so I met up with that professor again. I don't remember how long afterwards, but he threw out some more softball questions and I answered those. And then we started playing around with it where we came up, I wrote like 20 things you shouldn't say to an atheist, and he would film that. And that one went somewhat viral. And so afterwards, it got to the point where we're like, we should just keep doing this. The documentary never happened. But we ended up just making a lot of videos. Now I can do it in my basement. But there's like random crazy stuff going on in my basement right now. So the videos are on hiatus, but they'll be back soon. But it's been happening for like 3 or 4 years now where I can just kind of film something. We put it up on YouTube and there you go.
Yeah, I know those videos are very popular. I remember one, what did it say, to an atheist who sneezes? Like,
Yeah, what should you say after an atheist sneezes instead of bless you? I don't remember all the ones now, but there was a whole bunch of ones. I remember digging up. I remember people telling me that this is what they do in response instead of saying bless you. So that was entertaining.
I think one was like, could you die more quietly or something like that? I actually said that to a friend in class he sat behind me in one of our lecture classes. And so people like didn't know we knew each other. So after he sneezed, I turned around and said, "Could you please die more quietly?" And the girl to his left actually gasped when I said that.
Man, what are you doing in Louisiana?
Yeah, well, born and raised here in Louisiana, and I have. It's not often I really leave the South.
Yeah.
Except I went on a recent trip where I went to the East Coast and then the West Coast.
Oh,
Yeah, one was by plane, the other was by car.
oh my God, that's a long trip, whichever one it was.
Yeah, yeah, it was the West Coast one, the longer one. Yeah, that was the drive to California.
Oh my
Oh,
God. I hope you were with friends and it wasn't just a long drive.
it was family, and we got to see the Grand Canyon, so that was pretty
Oh, good.
neat.
Yeah, that's
I've
a
never seen it. Yeah, National Geographic does not do it justice.
yeah.
Sorry. No picture could do it justice. Um, let's see what else. So that you do videos and blogging made me wonder, when you talk to religious people, or how would you prefer to handle religious arguments? Would you prefer to like handle it person by person, or just do a video about it?
I actually think this is a personal preference. I like doing the blogs and videos where it's not it's not an argument. It's a one-way form of communication. Um, but I think it's easier to try to convince people who aren't part of the discussion, really. So if some religious person said something or did something, and I'm responding to that, I have no, I forgot the word I'm looking for. I don't think I'm going to change that person's mind. But maybe someone who's watching that video or reading that article who isn't involved in that conversation might see that and say, oh, look, I make a lot of sense. That other person doesn't. So I am going to agree with me. Now, pronouns are off there, but that I think that's a better thing. I've heard this from people who do debates too. Atheists who do debates say, look, I'm really not trying to convince the person I'm debating that I'm right, but I am trying to convince the audience that I'm right, and I'm playing to the audience. And that's kind of it. I want to convince you that I'm right, but if I'm responding to you or I'm talking to you one-on-one, I don't know that that's really going to happen. So my focus is on all the people who are maybe listening in or reading that conversation who I don't know who they are. I think they're out there. I hope they're out there. But I kind of work to try to convince those people that I'm right.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Would you consider doing a time debate?
I'm not a fan. And it's weird because I coach public speaking, like that's similar to debate, but it just doesn't seem right. I don't want to have that argument with someone If it's one-on-one over coffee or something and I knew the person, that's a different story. But I've gotten offers to debate. I've gotten offers to even sit down and like argue over this stuff, like over drinks or something. And it's just, it doesn't, what's the point? I know my side. I know my arguments. I've heard the other side's arguments. I don't think there's anything they're going to tell me that I haven't heard already. So it just seems like a waste of my time. To what am I trying to do? Convince that other person I'm right? No, because that's what they're trying to do to me. I mean, so it's just not something I'm interested in, but I have no problem with atheists who do debates because, again, it serves a purpose.
Yeah, that's understandable. Yeah, they say, what we need is a dialogue. No, what we need is a monologue. We got to side.
And I'm not opposed to dialogue, but like the dialogue that I prefer is the one where it's kind of played to an audience. Maybe that person writes an article or posts a video explaining their point of view, and then I can go back and pick that apart little by little. That to me is more useful than a debate, which can really be a performance. And if you're with someone who's a good performance, even if they don't have good ideas, they might win that debate. And again, that's almost a game at that point. You're not actually, winning on the merit.
Yeah, it's one of the general problems I hear about debate is if you can, get the most words out there, then that means you've won. If the other side isn't able to answer the 30 points that you pose in the 15 minutes they're given, then you've won. They didn't respond to most of my questions.
Yeah, and I mean, that's such a common form of debate that atheists even have a term for when creationists do it called the Gish Gallop, where they're just saying like 30 different things at you, like here's why creationism is true, and if you don't respond to every single thing they say, they use it as proof that they're right and you're wrong. And again, it's not a real debate. It's just people throwing a bunch of silly arguments at you, expecting you to respond to everything. It's not going to happen.
We will always be on the short end of that stick.
Right.
We gotta pick through all these things, and I think it's Aaron Ross said it would take an hour to explain to wade through like the 10 minutes or so that the other person spoke.
Right.
But yeah, I definitely agree. We still gotta talk to the other side often because sometimes they come up with new stuff or new versions of the arguments and things like that.
I will say when people email me or message me or something and it seems sincere and they genuinely have questions about this stuff, I do try to respond to them. If people are just trying to pick a fight or something or just have a debate or something, I don't usually respond to that. And the upside to that is they don't really bother me then as much.
Right. Yeah, it's do you read like a lot of creationist works?
I have like subscriptions. I subscribe to the feeds of a variety of Christian websites, and I do see what they say, mostly because I want to know if it's something that needs to be responded to, if that's something I should address on the website or something like that. That's the reason I read those. I usually don't if there are any new ones or anything like that, just because it seems repetitious and not really relevant. If people are going to be discussing stuff, it's something that's in the news, so I focus on that.
Yeah, definitely. I enjoy reading it sometimes because they will show how much they know about a subject often by the sources that they quote, or they'll quote mine something and then it's like, hey, wait a minute, I know where that's from.
Right.
Or I actually did a video recently where I looked at there's a creationist who acknowledges that a species of Australopithecus is actually related to humans.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so these other creationists say, no, it's not. And they try to argue with him on this. But they either ignore or misrepresent the data to try to argue with this other creationist. They're not even an evolutionist.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's
very, very funny.
One of the most enjoyable things I've seen is when Christians fight with each other on these sort of types of issues. Because like Pat Robertson, for example, he's not a young Earth creationist, and he's made fun of young Earth creationists. And then you have pastors who are like, well, those other pastors are not true Christians because they preach this or that. That sort of Christian infighting is always hilarious to watch.
Yeah, especially when they are talking about the ones who are preaching that prosperity gospel.
Yeah. Yep.
Like Joel Osteen and guys like that. Yeah,
I mean, those guys get trashed more than anybody because people call it not real Christianity, or those guys are not true Christians, or something like that.
Yeah, they give me your poor huddled messes, but not those. Not those ones. Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with the event last fall. Or Osteen wouldn't open up his church to the or winter. Sorry, it was winter.
Right.
Wouldn't open up his church to the poor masses huddled outside, whose homes had gotten flooded and destroyed, and then
right.
Oh well, like too bad.
Right.
But yeah, it's also fun to listen to people talk about Ken Ham and his followers. They might be more liberal, and so they'll say, "Hey, we should, evolution's definitely true. We don't have to take the Bible completely literally to be Christians." And I definitely appreciate people like that out there.
Right. And that's an important voice to have to push back against that sort of thing, because again, there's more than a third of the country that believes that creationist stuff, so it is important to push back.
And speaking of, did you see Eric Cohen's movie, The Paradise Lost?
I did not see the movie. I think I'm aware of the film, but I have not actually seen that one yet.
It was hilariously bad.
I'm not surprised in the least.
Yeah, it was just kind of a smorgasbord of creationist and intelligent design arguments, some of which actually contradicted each other.
Yeah.
To try to, just show that evolutionism is false.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually, some of their arguments contradicted each other, and they still played all of them. Like one guy said, "We're not closely related to chimps," and then the next guy said, "Well, yeah, we are closely related to chimps, but it doesn't mean anything."
Yeah. Well. Again, I wish they would figure it out themselves and then come out and tell us what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. It was funny. I've actually been to another creationist movie since then, just titled Alien Intrusion.
Oh, I haven't even heard of that one.
And it was about aliens that abduct people aren't actually aliens, they're demons.
Yeah. That sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, it was pretty ridiculous. One guy became a human popsicle.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, they spend like most of the movie arguing that there's no evidence for aliens or evolution or anything like that. So these are interdimensional aliens, or interdimensional demons.
Jeez.
Because that's clearly the more reasonable position to take on this.
Right. Of course it is. It's amazing how they always find money to make those movies. I'm always genuinely surprised by like the quality of some of those films and movies, where it's like they clearly had money to make this because it's good production value. It's just a horrible story or a horrible message. But it's like, man, people keep paying for this stuff. And sometimes, like God's Not Dead, it actually does get an audience.
Yeah, that movie was actually filmed here at LSU.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was awful.
Yep.
Just
third one's coming out soon. Yep.
Terrible movie. But yeah, I watched it like twice just to get all of the horribleness in.
The most surprising thing about that movie is, and I think they did this in the second one too, at the very end of the movie, like before the credits roll or after the credits roll, they have all these cases, like legal cases where Christians have been persecuted in the way you see in the movie. And I remember going through every single one of those cases, and you could narrow it, you could break it down and say, like, these are ones that no judge took seriously. These are ones where it wasn't really discrimination. These involved misunderstandings, whatever. They literally could not find one good case that suggested anything in God's Not Dead was plausible.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. And then they killed the atheist at the end of the first one.
Yeah.
Or one of the atheists.
Well, you got to do that. And have him coming back.
Yeah, at least he's a Christian now.
Mm-hmm.
But oh yeah, the second one was just it was also ridiculous because they were taking shots at the ACLU. You know, like, oh, this teacher quoted the Bible, which is not at all illegal.
Right. You could discuss the Bible if it's relevant in class. That's not an issue. It's when you get into proselytizing and like overtly and ignoring warnings that say, you know, you shouldn't be doing that, and they do it anyway. That's really when it is a problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was just like the Bible is. 1 second, please.
Mm-hmm.
We had a dang person come to the door.
Oh, okay.
I didn't stop knocking. I know you could hear me. But I'm going to try to drop out for a second so I can, because the chat is thinking my audio sounds weird.
Okay.
So I'm going to restart.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to act as placeholder for him.
RJ, feel free to grill my guests while I'm kind of. I'll be right back. Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, he's scrabbling up quite a bit. You were hearing him just fine.
Yeah, I was hearing fine at the beginning. It started to get scrambled later on.
Yeah. Yeah, the stealth good news clubs that have been going around the country, yeah. Those are creepy.
Those are creepy, and they specifically target little kids because they know they can brainwash them early.
Yeah, I have a lot of your work, Hemant, in my Troubles in Paradise project. I've been following you for years. I study the methodology of creationism, so you bump into a lot of the same areas that I do.
Oh,
and I love the interview that you had with that bumptious young girl who visited the Creation Museum. And
yeah, I'm trying to think which one that was.
Yeah, Kathy or something like that. I seem to think her name was.
Oh, they were the filmmakers, I think, who did like a documentary about it. Is that who we were talking about?
Yeah, she did a posting of it.
Huh.
And they had done a coverage on it, and what intrigued me about her was her reaction to the show itself, the material that was in the museum, because she was displaying all the classic secondary citation addiction. She would simply accept things as true without actually bothering to look into any of it. There was a credulity on her part.
You're talking about Tracy.
Yeah, Tracy, yes, Tracy, yeah. Sweet, pleasant person. Completely sincere, but she has no way to separate out the weird stuff from the other stuff, and she would never fact check anything. That's the pathological problem of creationists.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, hopefully he'll be able to get his feed restarted, and he'll be joining the thing. So I'll carry the ball here until he shows up again. Yeah. I came from a slightly different background because I wasn't religious at all. So I was an atheist from the get-go. I got kicked out of Sunday school for asking questions about the flood, and that was way before you were born. Yeah. But the whole I've much appreciated the way you've approached the problem. It's always temperate, it's always balanced, and you're fair, you're congenial. There's not a confrontational aspect of it, and I think that's a very important role model.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, there's philosophy, and everybody has to deal with these questions in one way or the other. And the problem is that some come into it carrying an awful lot of baggage. They're trying to pick fights, and rather than trying to understand what the other person's position is, even though you're not planning on agreeing with them.
Right. And so, as I was saying earlier, I try not to focus on the person I'm arguing with. It's more like I'm having a conversation for the imaginary people who are reading it, and I don't necessarily know if they're going to be listening.
Yeah. I try to approach everything from a source methods direction. That's the thing that I've been doing in the TIP project, and Jackson knows all about that, and Pologia, a few others on YouTube. They were doing it on their own, but I kind of upped the ante. Jackson's back in.
Hey.
Now I can carry the ball back over to you.
Okay. All right. Live chat. Tell me how I sound.
Hey, you sound good.
Beautiful.
Okay. Great. I hate when this happens. It really
sucks. Demons.
It's the creationists trying to take over.
Really.
They're in my my software. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. All right.
See side strike in the feed.
Alrighty. Oh goodness. So yeah, we were talking about the Christian films, and yeah, you're right. There are. It's really funny. Where do they come up with the money for these films?
they make. I mean, God's Not Dead made tens and tens of millions of dollars, and when you have one hit, it really does fund a lot of the other projects too. So. The company that puts out a lot of those movies, I mean, it's a business, and they're good at what they do. So I don't know necessarily how Eric Hovind gets money for his stuff, but the people making God's Not Dead, I mean, that's a cash cow. They're just reeling it in all the time.
Yeah, I think he made just over $1 million for Genesis Paradise Lost.
Okay, he raised that much to make it, you mean?
Well, I mean, I think that was the profit that he made. His profit was just over $1 million, which from what Paul tells me is pretty good for that kind of film. Because when I went to Alien Intrusion, there were, including myself and Savannah, 7 whole people in the theater.
Well, they may make their money from the production financing end of it, so that the distribution part and maybe DVDs that they do later is almost like a meringue.
And they sell them on their websites as a ministry in itself, so that churches can play them for schools as opposed to a movie theater. So they'll make money, and there's definitely an audience for that stuff, unfortunately.
Oh, millions of Hovindistas out there, so that's a ready-made market.
Yeah.
They the creation or Genesis Paradise Lost was a packed theater. That whole theater, had people in it.
That's fascinating.
And a lot of them with children, little kids. It was one of the funny things was there was a mom sitting. So I was on Savannah's right. So I was on her left. So on her right, there was a mom with like 2 kids, I think, and the mom was shaking her head to a lot of it. But then, of course, at the altar call, she was, nodding right along during the movie.
Yeah, she was probably doing that, the shaking of the head at, the terrible things that they're exposing about these nasty evolutionists. That would be that aspect of it.
Well, I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's probably true.
They're just appalled at all of this horrible things that they're finally hearing about from the preacher that they're never going to fact check. Mm-hmm. And so you get this daisy chain going on that is hard to break them off of.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they. Uh, I have not seen a whole lot of them. There was one that came out a few years ago. I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically a preacher was trying to get some law passed, but he was like framed for a murder for some reason because they didn't want the law to
Oh,
get
I
passed.
think the one Kevin Sorbo was in. He's a religious convert, and he's made a couple of those. I can't remember the name of it offhand. Yeah, it was done as a dramatic exercise rather than like a documentary.
Yeah. At any rate, it was super weird and it didn't make any sense.
You're expecting stance from a religious apologetic. Oh, really?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, definitely. Um,
The-
oh, go ahead, RJ.
Oh, well, there's a small cottage industry of like intelligent design novels and creationist novels that don't get made into movies,
Yeah.
but they'll have there's one that I read that was just hilarious years ago where a plucky creationist paleontologist, like there are a lot of those, had discovered this plot to keep secret the truth that the Earth was young and all of that. And there was a big pot boiler thing where they were searching after uranium or something at a military site, and it was just a mishmash of stuff. But this is how you can get the propaganda element that comes through both the dramatic exercise or the air quotes documentaries that they like to do, that Eric likes to do.
Yeah, it is very, very strange. um, what was Huffman, the guy, RJ here debated a creationist, and this guy actually has his own book about like, wasn't the pre-flood, I think, Noah and the pre-flood world.
Oh, I didn't know that he actually had written a book. That
Yeah.
he's an anesthesiologist who's a young Earth creationist and very parasitical. I mean, he swears by Andrew Snelling
Okay.
and stuff that he's got of answers in Genesis. And I finally had a chance to ask him the killer methods question, which was, do you fact check anything you read? And I literally got the deer in the headlight look that I was expecting, and it just everybody in the side feed was noticing it too, because he's just bong, and because it literally would never have occurred to him to fact check anything. He doesn't realize that he's just parasitizing off of secondary sources.
Well, that's good.
Oh, I do have another question to ask you. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the interview that you did.
Yeah.
Uh, what do you think is a really good argument against the existence of God?
So I don't know what I would say. It depends who I'm around. I would really want to throw the question back at them and find out what their evidence is for God's existence, because odds are it's something silly or it's anecdotal or something like that, and that's easy to refute. So, I mean, what's the argument against God's existence? There's no proof. The arguments for God's existence are examples of proof that don't actually work. So I just usually try to throw that question back at the person I'm talking to and say, you tell me why you think God exists, and I'll tell you why that doesn't make any sense.
Do you often see a lot of anecdotal arguments, or do you see more stuff like these kind of structured, like ontological or teleological arguments?
No, most people I'm in contact with, most people I'm talking to randomly are not well versed in the philosophical arguments, and they don't know the philosophical, or they don't know the words behind them. They just know that they prayed for something and then someone got healed, and they assume that those two things are connected. That's the sort of argument I hear more often than something like there had to be a first cause or something like that.
Right, right. Yeah, that
And
is the way with
also, if you're talking about religion in politics, religion in the news, again, that's the sort of thing we talk about. Oh, there was a school shooting, let's pray to God. It's not, here's the argument for why God led to that shooting or something like that. It never is. It's always, let's just pray, let's just try to push God through government. So that's where my focus is.
Yeah, that is great. There was I actually remember there was a law they were trying to pass recently concerning politicizing from the pulpit. Do you remember what that was?
There is a thing called the Johnson Amendment that says if you're a nonprofit church, which churches are, you can't tell people how to vote. Every nonprofit group has to play by this rule. It's called the Johnson Amendment, And Trump has said when he was campaigning that he's going to get rid of that if he's elected. Turns out after he was elected, he can't just magically do that. So they've been trying to find ways to go around it through like the budget bill, the appropriations bill, things like that. I don't even know where that is right now, but basically so many church leaders are like, we don't want that ability. We don't want to tell people how to vote. We don't want to mix politics in with our religion. I mean, there's a religious argument to be made for why that's a horrible idea. But among the religious right, the people advising Trump, the people he's closest to, this is like the biggest thing ever. Because I don't know why, but they figure if we can get into churches, we could tell everyone how to vote, even though they can already tell people about issues like, oh, look, gay marriage is bad. Here's a candidate who's against gay marriage. Look at that. They kind of know how to do that. So I'm not really sure why they need to repeal the Johnson Amendment.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Well, they want the imprimatur of it. They want the validation of it. That
Right.
From their worldview, your David Barton worldview, America is a Christian country, their brand of Christianity, not anybody else's.
Right.
Nobody else need apply. They'll be tolerant in air quotes of minorities, like maybe Roman Catholics, and not really bother too much about, because they want their version recognized as the thing. And
Right.
this is an impediment to their being able to say it openly and directly. And it's scary as hell. And it does indeed. You'll find Seventh-day Adventists and an awful lot of people in other religious groups who have been on the receiving end of being the minority religion,
Right.
that they don't want that at all.
Right. They don't want to see their church become politicized.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, you know, when the shoe's on the other foot, they don't want these things.
Right. And the scary thing is, too, if that thing is repealed, remember, churches, nonprofits have to tell the IRS, you know, here's how much money we took in. Here's what our top staffers got paid. Churches don't have to play by that rule. They don't have to release a name of donors or how much they gave. And if they could endorse candidates, that's a huge way for people to, like, imagine rich people saying to a church, if you endorse this candidate, I'll give you this, I don't know, $500,000 contribution. And like, it would just muddy those waters so badly. Like, I don't know if you're a church leader, why you would want to subject yourself to all that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I mean, they already, like you said, they talk about homosexuality, but they also talk about, you know, abortion.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
they can talk about issues. What they can't say is everyone go vote for this candidate, otherwise we have a problem.
Yeah, you could just imagine Amundsen, the guy that underwrites the Discovery Institute, the checks that they would be doing for these various social issues, and it would all be completely under the radar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, I remember there when the Wedge document came out, they were like, "Oh, ultimately we're trying to defend Christianity, and this is a cultural thing. It's not just about evolution versus intelligent design. There's also
They're trying to preserve like this Christian supremacy type of thinking."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the Dominionists, which are the wackaloon right-wing group of the wackaloon right-wing groups, that plays a very dominant role in an awful lot of creationist thinking. It certainly does with Kent Hovind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why that although you get the kind of the button-down Steve Meyer types at the Discovery Institute, and he used to be up at Whitworth here in Spokane, so I bumped into him on many occasions. But that's a minority group compared to the Kent Hovind style. And that hyper-conservatism that make John Birch Society seem liberal, that bunch is encountered much more directly at the grassroots, and that's feeding into the Trump support base in a way that is really worrisome.
Right. They do have a lot of power.
Yeah. Let's see. Do we have any questions from the chat for Mr. Mehta?
Well, Peter was asking, because he had been bumping into this issue of people who have been banned or junked from Twitter, to whether or not he can get involved in helping in those kind of cases. Peter brought that one up.
How do you help, like, unban people or something?
Yeah.
Twitter has a really weird way of dealing with, it seems, a lot of different atheists on Twitter, because they'll get like targeted, and then the atheist ends up being the one that's banned. You know?
I haven't experienced a lot of that, and my friends usually haven't either. post a statement that is critical of religion, and then a group of religious people will mark your tweet as spam and report it or something, even if you're making a joke, even if you were being fairly critical. But usually there's a way to respond to Twitter when they ban you to get reinstated. But I haven't seen that be a big problem, because the people who I've seen get banned usually deserve it. Usually. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because, people have told me, like, I'm not open-minded or bigoted or whatever because, you criticize religion in a fair way. You don't criticize the person, but you go after the ideas, and then you get called, bigoted or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I've been called rude when I've been criticizing them quietly and calmly, but I haven't been rude at all. But the very fact of challenging them is challenging their whole worldview. So it takes their entire personality and their universe apart.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, you can't have that. Can't have these critical evaluation of your own worldview, So, well, let's see. It's been about 45 minutes. So is there anything you want to add?
You know what? One thing I would encourage any of your listeners to do, if they're not already active, if they're not already promoting, if they care about atheism and they're not promoting it in some way, find a way to do it. I don't care if you're doing YouTube or having a discussion like this or going on Twitter. You don't have to do it with your name. Do it anonymously if you must. Go on Reddit. It doesn't matter. Talk about this stuff. Talk about it in a way where you're doing it for an audience of people, and do it regularly. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by the fact that people pick up on that. They'll follow you. They'll listen to you, because they want to hear sensible voices now more than ever. So if anyone's listening to this, find a way to promote atheism in your own way. And if you're afraid of going public with it, then don't go public with it. But there's a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. If you're able to talk about it, then we should show people that there are more of us out there than you think. And I think that was kind of that was the thing with homosexuality a little while back. They were like, if you're gay, then say it, because it's harder for people to be bigoted against this thing if it's their son or their cousin or aunt or whatever.
And they know you, it's harder to demonize you. That's it.
Got a couple questions from the readers in the live chat there. RSC asks, would like to know Hemant's definition of agnostic.
So agnostic, it depends. Are we talking about like the popular definition of it, or is it the philosophical one? I mean, I think the philosophical definition is, do you think we can know if God exists? If you think, you know what, we could figure this out, and the answer is God doesn't exist. Like, if the question is, do you think you could ever know the real answer? That's a fine definition. It's accurate, but it's not what most people think of. I think here's the wrong way to think about it. Don't think agnostic is in the middle. You're not, maybe I believe in God, maybe I don't. That's a separate issue. That's not what agnostic means. Agnostic is, do you think you can know if God exists? So there are people who are agnostic atheists. There are people who are agnostic theists. But those are separate issues. Don't assume agnosticism is halfway between believing in God and not believing in God.
Right. We have another question. How has advocacy changed for you over the years?
How has advocacy changed?
Of atheism. When you advocate atheism and things like that, how has that changed for you over the years?
It became a lot easier. I don't hesitate about saying something is wrong anymore. Whereas, if I were younger, or if I still were working at a school, like maybe I would pause before I said something I thought was controversial. And now that filter's gone. Now it's like, you know what, with the big problems we have with the religious right having as much power as they do, I feel compelled to speak up, and I'll criticize whatever is out there if I feel like it needs addressing. So it's gotten a little easier because one, I'm not the only person doing it. Not that I ever was, but there's a lot of people saying this stuff now. There's a lot of mediums to talk about this stuff, and that's a big deal. So I don't necessarily know who's going to see this video, but I also know that the videos I make, that's for a select group of people. Maybe you like the podcast more because you drive a lot. Maybe you like reading stuff on the website. I'm trying to convert you, and that's a good thing too. It also makes it easier for other people to chime in as well.
Right. Yeah, we do definitely appreciate the. I know I said that before. We do appreciate all the updates on Ham and his antics, and the world of religious people, because it seems like every time I open up Twitter, it's like pastor punched a kid in the stomach or something like that.
It's always something insane, and you're like, what the hell's going on? If anything, I hope that shows you religion is not a virtue, or that faith doesn't make you a better person, because that's easy to dismiss.
Right. Yeah. To show kind of that these things are more systemic than just it's a few bad apples.
Right.
Yeah. I definitely understand that. Okay. Well. All right. Well, it's been about 50 minutes, and I think we've had some good questions from the audience. Thank you, chat.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, all right. Well, I guess I'll shut this down. If there's anything you want to add to it.
No. If anyone wants
Well,
to,
I'll just say I'd love
yeah,
Hemant to be on my evolution hour anytime you want to pop in. I've been doing a weekly evolution hour on there, and I'd love to have conversations on a lot of things.
that sounds awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
And if anyone wants to reach me, they can find me at friendlyatheist.com. My contact information is all there.
Okay.
And I follow you on Twitter.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm at Hemant Mehta. Yep.
So, like I said, there will be a link to his blog in the description. So, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Hemant Mehta, for coming on today.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jackson. Thanks, RJ. I'll talk to you guys soon.
And thank you, RJ. You saved us.
Yep. Well, I'll try. There's nothing worse than dead air time on a live discussion.
Yeah.
Bad.
I appreciate it.
Yep, me too. All right, stopping the broadcast.